Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 27th of October as we get close to the anniversary of the ultimate crash. We're in a downturn, so you know that's going to add some more excitement. We've dipped below the red line down here on the extreme from a daily standpoint, at least for the ES. The shakeout's been in continuous negative since we had our original signal and slightly after we already had the DOC spread. None of that's changed. We've had some modest improvements from steel short-term buyers, which has been enough to kind of hold up things. But like I talked about the other day, that the NASDAQ, once it broke the 50% mark, would have a much bigger impact. And sure enough, it did. And they're going to fight to get back to that level. And you can see it from Morganacci, it's at the 11,554 range. Which we're slightly below, so that will be the push to try and get back to. Still, power mode 2, you're looking at that decline. You look at the DOC here with this straight decline, break below the negative 13.5. Now, if that's able to turn around, that would help. We're seeing some short-term buyer activity right now that's trying to support that, but it's going to take some effort. When we flip over to the euro, again, it's still in that sideways pattern here as we're in a flat DOC red construct right now. Still within the more bullish than bearish at this particular point, with that shakeout getting close to a negative. If it dips into the zero range, then I think you would definitely see more attempted lows. And of course, gold isn't going to go anywhere given what we're seeing with the problems of inflationary pressures. You don't have any U.S. stimulus happening, the election coming, so there's some off chance that election concerns and things like that on a sell-off could certainly prompt people wanting to move towards gold as a hedge, but I think it's more or less just enough to keep it where it is at this particular point until you have some proof that there's going to be a push for throwing more fiscal stimulus, because you're not seeing it anywhere. Though that may be a forced issue, at least with the EU, with the new lockdown procedures that they're instituting throughout much of the EU. From an intraday standpoint, so the previous day started with that end of day short signal that continued on Monday's open, and they tried to fight back, but again, we were looking at no DOC steel reset throughout the whole day for the most part. I mean, we came across and we got closest to it right here when we started to get an even, but every time you got close to the potential of a buy, you had the immediate steel below cyan with the orange popping above. Tends to promote weakness. We saw it a few different times, even when it was back and forth. Even on the rising, DOC red here, you had the P2 from back before, which, I mean, they worked out, but at the end of the day, it still belied the fact that we were still within a short construct without those resets. And sure enough, these power mode 2 spikes of the magenta on that indicated that we were getting a serious discrepancy between the algos and what was being presented from a price standpoint. And sure enough, they played out in a dramatic fashion here as that double move led to very significant run lower. And then even when we reached our base point, we started to get some T2s in that. They really weren't even producing enough to get back to the 23%. That's usually a death nail at that particular point. And then you saw right here was an interesting one, because it's the equivalent of where you had things rising, shakeout improvement. We were in gold rising here on the shakeout, but the spike of that orange going above. Now, in this case, you didn't get the steel crossing below, but it again represents that indication when you see that taking place, particularly on an exacerbated run of no steel reset. It becomes poignant because you would have looked for orange to dip below red. DOC at any point along here would have justified, being able to hold on to a plus side move. But when you're caught between these two, cyan and red with orange, that's a continuation move, and it stays continuation until this point where it started to accelerate. But it wasn't until all the way over here where we finally got the breakout configuration, and then DOC steel moving to plus 13, which is the equivalent of it coming from underneath, and that led to the actual only buy configuration that took place throughout the day. And it was pretty decent because, again, you're looking for falling 100% markers to bring up to price, and that's exactly what ends up happening by the time we get a little bit over here as the highs have dipped down below. And that then usually produces a little more choppiness, which it did. You had a couple of these ups and downs, and eventually we took another run towards the new high peak, and that lasted all the way until the end of the day. We've been flirting around this previous algo. We had positive extremes that go all the way back to right here, and before I had to reboot 16 times, I had a horizontal line there. Lovely issue with TS doing that. So that becomes the downside refill point, which we got very close to just a few minutes ago, and suspect that we're still going to be flirting between that. So this becomes the range here between the 98 and 83. It's a decent 15-point spread between those two. And at this particular point, it's just going to be a matter of watching those relationship moves here. We are in a slight uptick, though you didn't get the move from underneath cyan and back above, which would indicate much stronger push to the upside. So in this particular case, it's going to be like that previous one. It can continue for decent range, but what I'm going to be looking for will be steel move that comes back down below cyan, and then the orange obviously popping up would be a clear indication that it's not going to fare too well. So not to mention you have the dip below the red line, which was satisfied with this dip right here back to the lows, but overall this looks, in my view, weak until you get that positive extreme fill. So that's what I'll be looking for. As always, though, trade well. We'll talk again later. I'll be on the Skype chat putting up more details as needed.